everyone, and welcome back to The Opinion, the talk show where your opinions matter. Today, our topic for discussion is prostitution and whether it should be legalized in this country. I am Mirna Santiago, and joining me for that discussion is my co-host, Adeline Ortiz, and Professor of Philosophy and Ethics, Ed Grippe. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you.
Well, before we jump into our discussion today, I just wanted to give you some of the feedback that we received on our affirmative action session. It was, we got an overwhelming response, and just to give you some idea about some of the people who wrote in, Lisa from the Bronx says, "It's not the program or intent which is flawed, but the implementation is screwed up and the sabotage that's been done to it. Which has resulted in negative perceptions of affirmative action programs. With respect to the issue of token minorities, Steve from Florida says, yes, there are unqualified people of color in the ranks, but there are by far more unqualified people in positions across the board who are not of color, meaning there are more unqualified, worthless Caucasian men out there making decisions and making big money than there will ever be people of color or women doing the same. So why blame affirmative action for putting unqualified, worthless people of color alongside them?" And then finally, Cindy from Virginia says, "Some people expect that they're owed more than others because they're Hispanic or black or a woman. The last thing I want to see is a Hispanic trying to take unfair advantage of being a Hispanic because it creates a negative environment for other Hispanics who aren't asking for special treatment, and it makes people wonder if any Hispanic person is really worth a damn." So thank you so much for this fantastic feedback. We really appreciated it.
Well, before we jump into prostitution, I actually also want to share some hate mail that I got from from Diana out on Long Island. And I kid Diana, it wasn't really hate mail, but it was close to it. But Diana pretty much said that she doesn't think enough time has passed between the implementation of affirmative action and the changes that have taken place. So she thinks that it isn't time to kill affirmative action, and that I was wrong for saying that. So thank you, Diana, for writing to us. Now on to prostitution. In recent years, prostitution has really been at the forefront of the news cycle. I mean, we've just heard so much. We've heard about Elliot Spitzer, who was taken down from his governorship because of that. We have my personal favorite in recent days, the hot dog hooker, Catherine Scalia, I think her name is, out on Long Island, and she was actually arrested for servicing a different type of wiener out of her hot dog truck. And who can forget the Secret Service prostitution scandal in Colombia? And Adeline, you're nodding your head, so I know you have something to say on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, the mere fact that this issue continues to be in the news, continues to be discussed, says that we have to do something about it. Again, it's not called the oldest profession in the world for no reason. It's been around forever, since the beginning of time, and essentially it's not going anywhere, so why not regulate it? Why not legalize it so that we can monitor it, regulate it, provide protections to the women who are, and men these days, who are engaged in sex work? But most significantly, I think that the proponents for legalizing prostitution would say that it's a victimless crime, really. At the top of the list, it's a victimless crime. This is an act that takes place between two consenting adults, and it's basically a business transaction for all purposes. So where's the harm in having that?
Yeah, we're not even 5 minutes in, and I'm already going to disagree with you. It is. It's a victim. There's a victim there. Whether you're seeing it or not, it's not a consensual act. It's not an act that's a simple contract between two people. The fact that these women may by choice be out there being prostitutes, because it's mostly women. I think 85 to 90% of the profession, if I may call it that, are women. And these are women that are forced into it, and they're being forced into it for a reason. It's whether it's economic, whether they've been left by their husbands. These are young girls who've run away from home. These people are victims. And to say, it's consensual, there's definite victims in here. Ed, I'm curious to see what you have to say about this. Help me out here, because I don't agree that it's a victimless crime.
Well, the fact that it's the oldest profession doesn't make it okay to legally support it. Smoking cigarettes has also been a long-standing legal activity here in the United States and elsewhere. But that doesn't make it wise or healthy choice for the people who go and do this. And that's not even to mention the secondhand smoke effect on children. Because what happens is, of course, that there's harm, even though it is legal for an adult to smoke, but their children are going to be hurt. It's the same, I think, with prostitution. Even though if it is made legal, there's going to be the harm to children, in the sense that the children are going to be in the environment where the mother and on odd occasions the father will be acting in that way. And it would seem to be that there would be a psychological effect, if not a physical effect, on the children. And just to take it at an angle, another angle, the idea here is that, and who would want their child to go and have a career path like this if it was made legal? I work at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility sometimes, and I get to see the effects not only on the mothers, because it's all women prison, but also when the children come to go and visit them. These are women who've been, in other activities as well as in prostitution, and they come to regret it. So I have a sense that a hesitancy about saying it should be legalized.
And I just want to add one more thing on that angle as well, Adeline, is that there was a study done, I believe, in 2003, and I forget the name of the study right now, but it was some psychological association that did it, and they found that I think 89% of all prostitutes want out of the business and cannot get out for some reason or the other. Again, kind of piggybacking to what Ed was saying, I don't think any mother, when you're talking with your child, I have an 8-year-old, and when he talks about, I want to be X, Y, and Z when I grow up, I don't say, you know what, honey, I think you should be a prostitute. I think you'd be great at it. It's not a viable career choice, and I don't think we should be encouraging the people who are already in it.
Well, it's funny. Well, first of all, I think that there are several different issues here. I think that when you discuss the impact on children, when you discuss the issue of trafficking, and people who are forced into this profession, these are all very different issues from prostitution and from people who engage in sex work and who do it willingly. There are also plenty of women who willingly do this, who see this as a phenomenal source of income. Okay, so I think that to paint the picture that there are these women who are just so miserable and want to get out of it, just again, take a look at what's going on in the news. Take a look at what we're seeing. Take a look at a hot dog hooker. Okay? Does that look like an unhappy hooker? This is one happy hooker right here, okay? I mean, look at that smile. And not only is she happy doing this work, and apparently she's been doing this work for quite some time, because this is not the first time she was busted. She was actually brought on charges back in 2004, something like 8 years ago, and she's 45 years old now. So apparently this is someone who's been voluntarily, willingly, and happily engaging in this work for a long time, and she's not alone. There are many countries around the world legalize prostitution, and it's a multi-million-dollar industry. I mean, it's $1 billion a year. Germany has 6 billion euros per year. They have over 400,000 women engaged in sex work, and I can tell you that I don't think that 89% of them are doing it against their will.
Well, I have to tell you, and I've done the research as well on the countries that have legalized prostitution. And when you look at, just 2 countries that are neighbors, you're talking about Sweden and Finland. And Sweden has a sort of partial legalization of prostitution, where the women who are prostituting, the women who are out there on the streets and doing this, they're not going to get prosecuted. Okay, so if you get caught by the police and you're a prostitute, you don't go to jail, you don't get prosecuted. But they do prosecute the Johns and they prosecute the pimps. in Sweden. And what they've done is, meanwhile in Finland, it's open. It's open season for prostitution. People can prostitute anytime they want, where they want, with pimps, without pimps. And what's ended up happening is that they've seen a strong link between prostitution in Finland, where it's just openly legalized, and human trafficking. Last year alone, they've caught 17,000 people who were being trafficked. Humans, women. 80% of those people were women who were being trafficked for the prostitution trade in Finland, as opposed to 400 in Sweden. And I don't think you can sort of disregard that link and say it's all well and fine, because when you think about human trafficking, we're not talking about, the 50 Mexicans in the back of a truck coming across a border. It's a lot more subtle than that. You're talking about ads in newspapers geared towards college students, telling them, oh, come over here, live with the family, and you can go to school and you can work in our country. And then meanwhile, they're in the prostitution trade. You're talking about these people going into poor countries, like Africa, like Asia, where these women are desperate to go and work somewhere and provide for their families. And what these men, because it's mostly men who are doing the trafficking, are doing to these women, they're telling them, come with me, I'll get you a passport, I'll get you to the United States, I'll get you to Western Europe. And what they do is, they'll say it'll cost you $10,000 or $20,000, knowing that those women don't have that money, but they're desperate. And they'll say, okay, fine, I'll go with you, I'll work for those $10,000, and the sum keeps going up. Well, now you owe me money for food, that's $5,000. Well, now you owe me money for transportation, that's another $5,000. Before you know it, they owe $60,000, $75,000 or euros that they're never going to pay off, and the only way they're paying off is prostitution. That's a price, that's victims.
Okay, but that's also trafficking, which I think is a separate issue, and which I think will always exist because there's a certain demand for sex workers, and it's separate from legalizing prostitution. When I say legalized prostitution, I don't think that we should have the open season policy, as you say, that Finland has. There are several countries that have limited legalized prostitution, and with certain regulations in place and certain requirements. For example, certain countries say that you have to be 21 years old only. You have to register. You have to have regular health exams. You have to pay taxes. You have to contribute towards Social Security and health care insurance and things like that. I think that a sensible legalization of prostitution will include some, if not all, of these requirements for them. Okay, but it also gives the opportunity to regulate it, to monitor it, to see how many women are voluntarily involved in it versus those who are being forced into it. If we just continue to criminalize prostitution, then basically we don't know who of these people are engaged in this work voluntarily versus those that are being forced into it through trafficking. So I think that the argument you're making is actually one in favor of legalizing prostitution, so that we know who's in this business because they want to be versus who's being forced into it.
But it's not going to happen. You think you're a happy hooker, allegedly, because she hasn't been convicted. So for legal disclaimer purposes, it's alleged. I don't think the alleged happy hooker is going to go register herself and say, I'm a hooker. I think she'll be happy getting her money under the table. And that's the problem with
under the sheets.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem that you run into with legalizing prostitution, especially in this country, is that you're going to have the same sort of low-rung prostitute. No offense to prostitutes, but that's the same kind of people that you're going to get, and they're going to just not be prosecuted for it. So at least now we know that if you get caught prostituting, if you get caught doing something illegal, you are going to be prosecuted for it. My problem also, though, with this country in general is that we prosecute the prostitutes, but I don't think any of the Johns get prosecuted, and we should. I think that would dampen the prostitute trade even more.
Yeah. The idea of voluntary and happiness is a kind of a slippery slope, because how much is voluntary when there's economic coercion, like you were saying? Mm-hmm. If I'm poor, prostitution might be and then a viable option, but then again, I might want to go and do something else if I had the education, if I had the support of other people. Mm-hmm. So this would be a fallback position, I'm afraid, and then you're going to have a problem, is it really voluntary? The second thing about happiness is, and since I teach, philosophy and ethics, and I go and have a lot of writing, people writing about it, quite often people are very happy until they stop and think. And then they realize that they've been told that they're happy, they go and believe they're happy, there's an appearance of happiness and the actual happiness. One of the first students I had when I was teaching at Norwell Community College, he was telling me that he just liked fun, and he was going for fun. And the problem was that, hey, he was probably one of the saddest kids in the class, because he was always going for fun. And as Aristotle suggests, he should be going for excellence. And then the other part comes out, the happiness comes out. But if one goes just for happiness, if one goes for the idea of, okay, this is what I want, I'm going to pretend to go and be happy, or I'm going to actually feel I'm happy, but one starts to go and realize what's involved in that. Having strangers enter your body. I mean, let's be frank about it, you know. And on another point, history is really replete with the idea that, things that are legal, that are not also moral. Slavery, segregation as black codes were once legal, but nobody's going to claim that they were a moral part of our history. Apartheid, was the law of the land in South Africa, but people worked to go and stop that. Finally, the Nuremberg laws that were discriminating against the Jews in the extreme was once legal. Of course, that ended horribly. Now, Nevada, of course, has legalized prostitution, and maybe there are a whole bunch of happy hookers there. But that doesn't mean that it makes it ethical, right? In the sense that there's no harm being done. Because what's going on is that you're commoditizing an intimate act between human beings. And each participant, therefore, is actually seeing each other as a use object. And as a use object, these participants undermine that humanity, the community that is an integral part of, well, how we are showing respect, that I-thou kind of respect, of a human interaction that gets undermined, that will show up in ways that is going to reveal the kind of it-it relationship, as Martin Buber talks about, an it-it relationship that does a psychological and subtle harm. And just tying it back into the children, there is an intimate connection between that, because a lot of prostitutes also have children, or they give them up.
Yeah, but even kind of moving away from the children, I get your point about the children, but even for the prostitutes that don't have children, what about just the damage to them physically? I think the studies have shown, Adeline, prostitutes are at higher risk for cervical cancer, for urinary tract diseases, for obviously STDs, such as HIV, and you're saying, well, let's make them get tests. That creates, to me, a false sense of security, because now people are saying, well, you know what, prostitutes get tested, I really don't have to worry about it. But the fact of the matter is that even if they're tested, those diseases have a latency period. You could have HIV for 6 months and never find out until at that point that it pops up. So, it's a real issue. You're putting yourself at risk, and I understand that there are other professions that also put themselves at risk. But to do this willingly, to do it sort of voluntarily, like you're saying, I think the government has a place in protecting its citizens, and that's why it's criminalized here.
Well, again, I think that your argument is actually one that's in favor of legalizing prostitution, because when you talk about having them tested creates a false sense of security. Well, think about the men who are purchasing these services. I think it's 1.2 million men per day in Germany that use the services of a prostitute, okay? I don't think that they're looking for security. I don't think that they go and hire a prostitute to say, gee, I don't know, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be disease-free? Am I going to be healthy when I'm finished with this transaction, with this little deal, with this experience? They don't care. They're not paying attention to that. However, if you legalize it, at least you're taking a step in the direction of mitigating some of those risk factors by making sure that these women are, number one, contributing towards health insurance, receiving health benefits, being tested on a regular basis, and that to the best extent possible are healthy. I mean, I think we need to face the reality that prostitution has been with us for a very long time, and it's not going anywhere.
May I jump in?
Please do.
So has murder, so has other things been around for a very long time. That doesn't make it okay. I'm the only man on this panel. And let me go and say, well, I've never used a prostitute. Let me make that clear. My wife will be watching. But the idea here is that, well, imagine a scenario. Here is a man saying to this legal prostitute, look, sweetie, I'm going to give you an extra $500, no condom, and let me do what I want. The temptation, since they're doing a business transaction, is to make as much money as possible. And there are going to be women who are going, or men who are going to get exploited in that way. And this is the danger that we go and have. Yes, it already exists, but do we go and want to go and say it's a good idea? Just as much as, you know, a person taking heroin, it exists. Do we want to go and legalize heroin and say to my 6-year-old son, you could use this? No. There has to be a stand at some point.
It does. And not to mention the violence that exists against the prostitutes, you know, already. I mean, how do you limit the boundaries of a transaction? How do you say, you know, okay, I'm going to agree to an oral transaction, let's say, and then you get behind closed doors and that person wants something else, you know, they want the front door or the back door or whatever it is that they want. I mean, how do you say, well, no, I agree to an oral transaction? You know, you're not going to be writing contracts at the point of transaction. You simply cannot legalize it. There are just too many things, too many attendant issues and harms and dangers to the prostitutes that if you get the government involved and now you have the government saying it's okay to do this, you know, now the government is liable. I just don't think it's credible. I don't think you can do it. It's not viable.
You absolutely should and can and should legalize it for exactly that reason. Again, because you do get to provide greater protections to the women who are engaged in this type of work. You do ensure that police will respond when they're called. For example, Gary Ridgway, who is an American serial killer who was convicted several years ago, I think back in November 2003, after he confessed to having murdered nearly 100 prostitutes. When asked, why did you target prostitutes? His response was, because I knew I wouldn't be held accountable. Okay? Nobody comes to the rescue of these women. So if they're yelling rape, the police are saying, well, really, you put yourself in that situation. You exposed yourself to that risk. You were asking for it. And again, how do we distinguish between what you bargained for in terms of what you said you were willing to do versus what actually happened to you? So prosecuting it is difficult. But if we don't legalize prostitution, then we're not offering them any protection whatsoever. Same thing with the Craigslist killer. Craigslist killer, Philip Markoff was his name, right? The medical student in Boston. Same thing, targeted prostitutes, basically targeted women who were offering services for erotic services in a hotel environment. And this is how he targeted them. He'd call them up, he'd schedule an appointment, and then he'd go and threaten to kill them or abuse them in some way. Why? Because the police don't respond when these women call. The police don't care about what happens to a prostitute. Legalizing it would change that.
Yeah, I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one because we're actually out of time for our discussion on prostitution. But of course, as always, we have our lightning round. And our lightning round this week promises to be very interesting because, you know, the question that's been posed is, why is it that black people can call themselves the N-word? And for clarity's sake, you know, I'm not going to keep using the N-word. I'm going to say it. Why is it that black people can call themselves niggas and other people can't call them niggers? So, you know, Adeline, let's start with you.
Oh, they can't, and they shouldn't. I think it's absolutely outrageous. I think that how you label yourself, how you label yourself, basically creates the perception that you want people to have of you. And I don't think that blacks should refer to themselves as niggas, niggers, or whatever they want to refer to themselves as. I don't think it's fair. Because on the one hand, they can go around calling themselves by this derogatory term. They can label themselves this way. But God forbid somebody in the office says it. Somebody uses the term in the wrong way or says it in a joking manner. All of a sudden, we have a federal lawsuit on our hands. They're screaming race discrimination. So you either want to be viewed that way, you either want to be perceived by this label that you're attaching to yourself, or you don't. You just can't have it both ways.
Well, you know, I think it depends on the content and the context of the word. And I think if people call themselves that, it's up to them. You know, if I invite you to my house and you see my husband calling me a horse's ass, you know, that's my business with my husband. You know, it could be an inside joke. It could be something else. You try calling me a horse's ass, it's going to be on. But you know what I'm saying? It really depends on what people decide is acceptable for them. And for me personally, you know, if a black person comes up to me and says, oh, you're my nigga, do I use the word? No. Do I condone the use of it? No. Is it acceptable in my house? Absolutely not. Will I sue if somebody at work calls me that? Absolutely. You better believe it. But if another black person comes up to me and says it, you know, I'll be like, all right, and just walk away. I'm not going to be like, oh, you're my nigga too. I don't use it. But you know, I have been on the receiving end of both sides of it, where I've had a black person come up to me. You know, I was in court one day and I happened to do something. I don't remember what it was. I was arguing a motion, and I guess I did a good job. And a young boy, because I've only heard like young kids use it amongst themselves. He was like 17 or 18, and I walked by and he was like, oh, you did good, my nigga. Something like that. And I just looked at him, I was like, all right, and I kept going, you know? And I was okay with that. I was like, you know what, you know, ignorant child, you know, but I kept it going, I moved on. Now, I've also been called nigger by someone, and it wasn't even in the South. It wasn't that long ago. It was, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, and it was on Madison Avenue. I was in my suit, going to work, and to my office in Madison Avenue, and I guess I got too close to a woman, and she turned around and she said, why are you following me, nigger? And I stopped, and I was like, okay, who is this woman talking to? Because you don't assume that people are going to address you that way. And she said, I'm talking to you, nigger. She said, get away from me. And then she said, and yes, I called you a nigger. Nigger, 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 nigger.
Oh my God.
Crazy person.
And she kept saying it. And ultimately, I looked at her, and I thought, you know, and I'm from the South Bronx, so I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm going to have to take somebody down today, you know. But I stopped, and I stopped myself. I looked her in the eyes, and I said, lady, you're not worth my time. And I kept going. But it's the content, it's how it's being used, and what the meaning is behind it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, just to now bridge the two topics, you know, if a woman calls herself a hoe, does that you know, goes and actually allows other people to go and have a derogatory view of that woman. You know, so you have a problem here. You know, the same may be the case with the N-word. If it is being used, then it seems to be okay. It's out there. It's fair game. It's in the population. Even the taking of a word such as bitch, as some feminists have done, opens the door to somebody who's going to use it or abuse it in that context or another context. The idea that the same thing could happen to other groups like African Americans. The way we go and choose to go and see ourselves, and I happen to notice that you ignore the young, ignorant man who used the word, so there is actually something too offensive even from an African American to an African American. Why would it be okay, you know? I'll leave that like that.
Well, you know, I think my last point on this is that people only seem to find it offensive when it comes to blacks. I think people are offended that blacks get to call themselves niggers and they don't get to call them niggers. But the fact of the matter is that other groups of people also do it. You have now, you know, the gay people who have reappropriated the word queer. Queer historically was a very derogatory term for being gay, and now, you know, you have queer eye for the straight guy. You have queer as folk. It's part of the lexicon. The same thing with redneck. All right? Would I go up to a white person and call him a redneck? No. But you have redneck chopper. You have my big redneck wedding, my big redneck vacation. You know, Jeff Foxworthy, who's made millions off of You Know You're a Redneck If series. You know, I think it's the same thing.
Well, again, Mirna, you can't have it both ways, okay? If you're going to call yourself a nigger and you're going to attach that label to yourself, then you can't go and sue the whole of, you know, corporate America when they use that term to label you as well. If you're going to call yourself a redneck or a hoe, and then your manager calls you a redneck or a hoe, then, you know, you're basically in the same position.
Well, guys, thank you so much for that
You're
discussion. It was very enlightening. That is all the time that we actually have for the show today. But, you know, I hope you guys out there enjoy the topics that we have discussed. And as always, keep sending us your comments, your thoughts, and, of course, your opinions, because this show is about you. And join us the next times when our show topics will be equal rights, you know, marriage, equal marriage rights, and also whether Puerto Rico should be the 51st state. So thank you.